Mark Peterson was once the kind of man who lit up every room he walked into. Tall, charismatic, and brimming with life, he was the person friends relied on and strangers gravitated toward. But that spark was now gone. Kidney failure had turned him into a shadow of the man he used to be. His days were reduced to a cruel cycle of fatigue, medications, and hospital visits, each one draining him further of hope. At his side, unwavering in her devotion, was Sarah Peterson. A dedicated nurse and a woman of quiet strength, Sarah had become the glue holding their fragile lives together. By day, she worked grueling 12-hour shifts at Bloomfield Medical Center, tending to patients with the same care and compassion she poured into her home life. By night, she cared for Mark, managing his medications, comforting him during sleepless nights, and fighting to keep their marriage afloat amid the relentless strain. Bloomfield, their quaint Midwestern town, seemed to echo their struggles. Known for its rolling farmlands and close-knit community, it had always been a place of simplicity and security. But now, it felt like a cage, with every familiar face a witness to their private pain. Sarah clung to the hope that brighter days were ahead, even as the weight of Mark's illness threatened to pull her under. For better or worse, she told herself, they were in this together. Little did she know, the storm brewing within their marriage would test her in ways she could never have imagined. Mark's health spiraled downward, each day a grim reminder of the ticking clock. His rare blood type made the search for a donor feel like an impossible quest, with each passing month narrowing his chances. Dialysis became his lifeline, but it was a frail tether, barely enough to sustain him. The man who once carried the weight of their dreams on his shoulders now struggled to make it through the day. For Sarah, watching Mark waste away was unbearable. Each moment of his suffering carved another wound into her heart. Then came the call she hadn't expected, a test result confirming she was a match. The revelation sent a jolt through her. She had the power to save him, but would he accept it? When Sarah shared the news, Mark's reaction wasn't the relief she had hoped for. Instead, his face darkened with a mix of fear and guilt. "I can't let you do this," he whispered. "You've already sacrificed so much." But Sarah's decision was unshakable. Her love for Mark wasn't just in the vows they had exchanged or the years they had spent together. It was in the quiet moments, the sacrifices she made without hesitation, and the deep knowing that she could never imagine a life without him. "I'm not losing you," she told him, her voice firm despite the lump in her throat. "Not if there's something I can do about it." Mark resisted at first, his pride and fear battling against her determination. But Sarah's resolve was unrelenting. She reassured him, reminding him of the life they had built and the future they still deserved to share. Slowly, her love chipped away at his doubts. The decision was made. They would face the surgery together, bound not just by necessity, but by a love that defied fear and embraced sacrifice. What neither of them knew was that this act of selflessness would uncover deeper fractures in their relationship, cracks they would be forced to confront in the most vulnerable moments of their lives. The day of the surgery arrived laden with equal parts fear and hope. Sarah walked into the hospital hand in hand with Mark, a mixture of determination and calm radiating from her. Mark, on the other hand, carried the weight of guilt, fear, and a quiet sense of awe at Sarah's unwavering courage. Hours passed in the sterile confines of the operating room. When the surgeons emerged, their faces carried good news. The transplant was a success. Mark would have a new lease on life. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of recovery. For Mark, each day brought a renewed strength he hadn't felt in years. The dull ache of illness was replaced by a vitality that seemed almost foreign. He found himself able to do things he hadn't done in ages. Simple acts like walking around the neighborhood or cooking breakfast for Sarah. For Sarah, the recovery wasn't just physical. Watching Mark heal was a balm for her own body and soul. The man she loved was coming back to her, piece by piece. The experience brought the couple closer than ever before. Mark, no longer consumed by the fog of illness, expressed his gratitude with a depth Sarah had never seen in him. He filled their days with small gestures, a handwritten note tucked into her bag, an impromptu dance in the kitchen, or quiet words of appreciation as they lay in bed at night. "I can't ever repay what you've done for me," he said one evening, his voice thick with emotion. "But I promise I'll spend the rest of my life trying." Their love felt invincible, forged anew by the trials they had faced together. For a while, it seemed that their story had reached its perfect, happy ending. But even as Mark's health improved and their bond deepened, cracks began to show in the foundation they had built. The surgery and its aftermath brought challenges neither had anticipated, challenges that tested the very love they thought was unshakable. 6 months after the surgery, Sarah began to sense a shift in Mark. At first, she dismissed it as the stresses of adjusting to a healthier life. He started working late more often, claiming he was catching up on time lost during his illness. His once affectionate demeanor turned distant, his laughter more muted, and their long, heartfelt conversations became short and transactional. Sarah told herself it was just a phase. Perhaps he was processing the life-changing event they had been through. But when she found herself sitting alone at the dinner table night after night, doubt began to creep in. One evening, while tidying up Mark's office at home, Sarah stumbled upon something that made her stomach drop. A receipt for an expensive dinner at a restaurant they had never visited together. The date on it coincided with one of his late nights at work. Beside it was a small velvet box. Empty. Her mind raced, piecing together every odd behavior, every unexplained excuse. The weight of suspicion was unbearable, and Sarah decided she needed answers. The truth unraveled quicker than she had prepared for. With trembling hands, Sarah went through Mark's phone while he showered one night. What she found confirmed her worst fears. Texts filled with flirtation, plans, and even photos, exchanged with a colleague from work. Her heart shattered into a million pieces as the man she had fought to save, the man she had given a part of herself to, literally, was revealed to be unfaithful. When Sarah confronted Mark, her voice trembling but resolute, his face turned pale. At first, he tried to deny it, but the evidence was undeniable. Finally, he broke down, confessing to the affair. "I was scared," he said, tears streaming down his face. "I felt like I owed you my entire life, and it made me feel small. I didn't know how to handle it. She made me feel normal again." Sarah's eyes burned with fury and heartbreak. "Normal?" she spat. "I gave you my kidney, Mark, my kidney. Do you have any idea what you've done? You didn't just betray me, you betrayed everything we fought for." Mark fell to his knees, begging for forgiveness, but Sarah couldn't hear him over the roaring in her ears. The trust she had in him, the love they had rebuilt, lay in ruins. For the first time since their vows, Sarah didn't know if their marriage could survive. Heartbroken and humiliated, Sarah found herself teetering on the edge of despair. Her once unshakable love for Mark now curdled into something dark, a desire for revenge that consumed her every waking moment. She had sacrificed everything for him, her body, her peace of mind, her dreams of a future filled with mutual respect and love. Now all she could see was his betrayal and the smug face of the woman who had taken what little remained of her happiness. Late at night, when the world around her was silent, Sarah's thoughts spiraled into dangerous territory. She replayed every moment of their ordeal in her mind. The grueling tests, the fear of the operating room, the excruciating recovery. She had endured it all to save him, only to be cast aside like she was disposable. Sarah's pain morphed into a chilling resolve. She began to see her medical expertise not as a tool for healing, but as a weapon. She had spent years studying the human body, understanding its weaknesses and mastering its complexities. Now that knowledge opened the door to 1,000 possibilities. Fueled by equal parts rage and betrayal, Sarah delved into research, cloaking her intentions in curiosity. She pored over medical journals, case studies, and transplant survivor forums. She learned about the medications Mark needed to prevent organ rejection and the delicate balance they maintained in his body. The idea began to form, insidious and seductive. She could make him suffer, subtly and carefully, just as he had made her suffer. In her private moments, Sarah rehearsed the role she would play. To Mark, she would appear as the devoted, forgiving wife, standing by his side as he navigated his health. But beneath the surface, she would be orchestrating his unraveling. One night, as she stood in the bathroom staring at her reflection, she whispered aloud, "I gave him life, I can take it back." It wasn't a plan yet, just a thought, a dark seed planted in the soil of her broken heart. But as the days passed, it began to grow, nourished by every lie Mark told and every painful reminder of what she had lost. Sarah's transformation into a calculated avenger was methodical, almost surgical in its precision. To Mark, she appeared every bit the forgiving wife, soft-spoken, understanding, and willing to rebuild their marriage. Her eyes no longer brimmed with tears of betrayal, but with a practiced warmth, carefully calibrated to keep him at ease. "I just want us to move forward," she said one evening, her voice steady as she placed her hand over his. Mark, guilt-ridden and eager to believe her, smiled weakly and nodded. Behind the scenes, Sarah's mind was a hive of activity. Every interaction, every conversation with Mark was an opportunity to gather intelligence. She asked about his medications under the guise of concern, probed gently into his daily routines, and observed the subtle changes in his body language and energy levels. At night, while Mark slept soundly beside her, Sarah slipped into the spare room, which she had converted into a hidden workspace. Medical supplies she had discreetly acquired were neatly organized, syringes, vials, and pills she had obtained under the pretense of hospital shifts. She reviewed her research obsessively, cross-referencing it with her own knowledge to ensure there was no margin for error. Her plan required patience. She couldn't afford to act out of impulse or leave a trail. She began by testing the waters, subtly adjusting the dosage of Mark's anti-rejection medication. It was a minor alteration, one that wouldn't raise immediate suspicion, but would plant the seeds for future complications. To reinforce the facade of reconciliation, Sarah planned romantic evenings, shared old memories, and even suggested counseling. She wanted Mark to feel safe, secure in the belief that his mistakes had been forgiven. One evening, while watching television together, Mark leaned back with a contented sigh. "I don't know how I got so lucky with you, Sarah, after everything I did." Her smile was serene, but her thoughts were anything but. "I told you, Mark. I made a vow, in sickness and in health." As weeks turned into months, Sarah's deception deepened. She manipulated the narrative so skillfully that even their closest friends believed they were on the path to healing. Mark had no reason to doubt her, no inkling of the storm that was brewing just beneath the surface of her calm exterior. The cabin at Lake Crystal was picture perfect, nestled deep within a grove of towering pines. The shimmering water of the lake reflected the golden hues of the late summer sun, and the air was filled with the crisp, clean scent of nature. Sarah had selected the location with care, knowing its seclusion would offer both privacy and opportunity. "This place is incredible," Mark said as they arrived, his voice tinged with a mixture of awe and relief. He carried their bags inside, his spirits seemingly lifted by the peaceful surroundings. Sarah smiled, her expression radiant. "I thought we could use a break from everything," she said, slipping her arm around his. "Just you and me, a fresh start." Mark nodded, his guilt resurfacing. He had betrayed the woman who had not only saved his life, but stood by him when he was at his weakest. This trip felt like a chance to make amends, to show Sarah he was still the man she fell in love with. Inside the cabin, Sarah had prepared every detail meticulously. Candles lined the rustic dining table, and the fridge was stocked with Mark's favorite meals. She suggested long walks by the lake, fishing, and cozy nights by the fire. To Mark, it felt like the honeymoon they never had. Mark recognized, but Sarah's mind was far from idyllic. She watched Mark closely during their time together, observing his reactions to the subtle adjustments she had made to his medication in the weeks prior. His energy levels were slightly lower, his appetite more erratic, and his complexion paler. She took mental notes, carefully calculating her next steps. On their second evening, Sarah suggested they toast marshmallows over the fire. Mark laughed as he fumbled with the skewers, and for a fleeting moment she almost forgot her plan. Almost. "Here's to us," Mark said, raising his glass of wine. "To second chances." Sarah clinked her glass against his. "To second chances," she echoed, her tone light. But her mind was already racing ahead, considering how she would escalate her plan in the coming days. She suggested they take a canoe out onto the lake the next morning. Mark hesitated at first. He hadn't been feeling his best, but Sarah's enthusiasm convinced him. As they paddled through the still waters, Sarah felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sorrow. Mark's trust in her was absolute, and he had no idea of the storm brewing beneath her calm exterior. That night, while Mark slept deeply from the exertion of the day, Sarah sat by the fire, staring into the flames. Her emotions churned, a volatile blend of love, betrayal, and vengeance. She reminded herself why she was doing this, replaying the images of his infidelity and the heartbreak that had consumed her. The cabin, isolated from the world, became the perfect stage for the final act of Sarah's dark plan. The cabin was quiet, save for the soft crackling of the fireplace. Mark was seated on the worn leather armchair, sipping his evening tea, a nightly ritual Sarah had encouraged since their arrival. The shadows cast by the fire flickered across Sarah's face as she sat across from him, her expression unreadable. "You know," she began, her voice calm yet carrying an edge that made Mark glance up from his cup. "I've been thinking a lot about us, about everything we've been through." Mark set his tea down, sensing the shift in her tone. "Sarah, I know I've made mistakes, terrible ones. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to you." Sarah tilted her head, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. "You're right about one thing. You've made terrible mistakes." She leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. "Do you even realize what I gave up for you, Mark? What I sacrificed so you could have a second chance at life?" Mark's face paled. "Sarah, please. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but—" "Forgiveness?" Sarah interrupted, her voice rising. "You think this is about forgiveness? I gave you my kidney, Mark. My body will never be the same because of you. I saved your life, and you repaid me by destroying mine." Mark stood, his hands trembling. "I was wrong. I was weak, but I love you, Sarah. I always have." Sarah laughed bitterly, the sound echoing in the small cabin. "Love? You don't know the meaning of the word." She stood now, towering over him. "But don't worry. I'm going to teach you what real sacrifice feels like." Before Mark could respond, a wave of dizziness swept over him. He stumbled, clutching the edge of the chair for support. "What's happening?" he mumbled, his vision blurring. Sarah stepped closer, holding up the vial of pills she had been subtly slipping into his tea over the past week. "You've been so trusting, Mark, drinking whatever I hand you, eating everything I prepare. But I suppose trust is what got you into this mess in the first place, isn't it?" Mark's knees buckled and he fell to the floor, gasping for breath. "Sarah, please!" Sarah knelt beside him, her expression a mix of fury and anguish. "I loved you," she whispered. "I gave you everything and you threw it all away. Now you'll finally understand what it feels like to lose everything." As Mark's strength waned, Sarah picked up her phone, dialing 911. Her tone shifted instantly to one of panic and desperation. "Please help," she cried into the receiver. "My husband's collapsed. We're at a cabin in Lake Crystal. He's not breathing." The ambulance arrived within the hour, but by then Mark was unconscious, his pulse faint. The paramedics worked frantically to stabilize him as Sarah watched, her face a mask of worry. Whether Mark survived or succumbed to Sarah's calculated revenge remains a mystery, but one thing was certain. Sarah's story wasn't just one of love and betrayal, it was one of transformation. From savior to avenger, she had reclaimed her power in the most chilling way possible. The days following the incident at Lake Crystal passed in a blur of sirens, whispers, and unsettling news reports. The small town of Bloomfield, where Sarah and Mark had once been known as the perfect couple, now buzzed with rumors of the tragedy that had unfolded in the cabin. Sarah was initially hailed as the grieving wife, the woman who had done everything in her power to save her husband, only to be left with heartbreak and betrayal. At first, no one suspected the dark truth behind Mark's collapse. Friends and family expressed their sympathies, rallying around Sarah as she played the role of the devastated spouse. But as the days went on, whispers of Sarah's strange behavior began to circulate. The medical community, where Sarah had once been trusted as a nurse, found it difficult to ignore the mounting suspicions. Some of her colleagues had noticed her growing obsession with Mark's condition before the trip to Lake Crystal, her frequent visits to the hospital after hours, and her increasingly meticulous research into the effects of kidney transplants. Though many had dismissed it as the stress of caring for her sick husband, a few now began to piece things together. And then, the shocking revelation, a toxicology report confirmed the presence of a rare, lethal substance in Mark's system, one that Sarah had known how to acquire and administer. The authorities, once blinded by the notion of Sarah as the grieving wife, now had to confront the unsettling truth. Sarah was arrested for the attempted murder of her husband, and the case quickly became a media sensation. The perfect couple, whose story had once been a symbol of love and devotion, was now a twisted tale of vengeance, betrayal, and the darkest depths of human emotion. As the trial began, the courtroom was filled with a mixture of stunned onlookers and curious journalists, all eager to learn what had truly driven Sarah to take such drastic measures. Sarah's calm, emotionless demeanor during the proceedings sent chills through the room, as though she had accepted the inevitability of her actions. Her defense attorneys tried to argue that she was a victim of emotional trauma, but the prosecution painted a damning portrait of a woman who had calculated every step of her revenge. Mark, having miraculously survived, was called to testify. His presence in the courtroom was a haunting reminder of the bond he and Sarah had once shared, now shattered beyond repair. He spoke of his love for her, his regret for the affair, and his devastation at what Sarah had done. But even as he sat there, clearly broken and bruised by the ordeal, he could not escape the fact that his own actions had led to this nightmare. The trial, which captivated the nation, ended with Sarah's conviction. She was sentenced to life in prison for attempted murder, but the true weight of her punishment would not come from any courtroom decision. It came from the emptiness of her victory. The hollow satisfaction of knowing she had succeeded in her quest for revenge, only to lose herself in the process. As for Mark, he was left to rebuild his life, haunted by the knowledge that the woman who had saved him had ultimately become the source of his deepest pain. Though he survived the physical effects of the transplant and the poisoning, the emotional scars remained. In the aftermath, friends and family of both Mark and Sarah struggled to come to terms with what had happened. Many questioned how a love that had once seemed so pure could spiral into such darkness. They wrestled with the themes of sacrifice, trust, and the fragility of the human heart. The case became a cautionary tale, one that reminded the world of the dangers of unchecked emotions, and how even the deepest bonds can be twisted into something unrecognizable when betrayal takes root. The tale of Sarah and Mark Peterson becomes more than just a story of love, loss, and revenge. It becomes a chilling reminder of the complexity of the human heart. The small town of Bloomfield, once filled with the hope of new beginnings after Mark's successful transplant, now lives in the shadow of a darkness that no one could have foreseen. The faces of those who knew Sarah and Mark well have been forever altered by the harrowing truth. Their understanding of human relationships fractured in ways they cannot repair. As Sarah sits in her cell, the harsh fluorescent lights above her flickering in rhythm with her thoughts, she is forced to confront the consequences of her actions. The life she had once fought so hard to save is now a distant memory, tainted by the very hands that had once nurtured it. The love she had for Mark, pure and passionate, twisted into something darker, something unrecognizable. A force that consumed her and erased everything she had once stood for. Mark, too, is left to rebuild, but his own journey is filled with unanswered questions. His survival, both physical and emotional, is a fragile victory, one overshadowed by the knowledge that he had been the architect of his own betrayal. He once vowed to cherish Sarah, to make up for the mistakes of the past, but how can a promise be kept when the very foundation of their bond has been shattered beyond recognition? Is there any way back from the destruction they've both caused? A question lingers. Was Sarah's revenge justified, or did she lose herself in the process? Did the love she had for Mark truly die with the affair, or did she twist it into something far more destructive than anything she could have ever imagined? The answer is far from clear. Revenge, as it turns out, is a double-edged sword. It may satisfy the thirst for justice in the short term, but it leaves scars that no amount of time can heal. In the end, the story of Sarah and Mark Peterson serves as a stark reflection of the consequences of betrayal. It is a reflection on the fragility of human emotions, the thin line between love and hate, sacrifice and selfishness, forgiveness and vengeance. And as the final chapter closes, the true horror of their story is not in the violence or the dark planning, but in the emotional devastation that lingers long after the dust has settled. The heartache of betrayal, once seeded, grows beyond anything anyone could have predicted, leaving in its wake a trail of emotional destruction that is far harder to repair than any physical wound. In their search for revenge, Sarah and Mark lost something far more precious: their very souls. And so, the question remains for those who hear their story: can love ever truly heal when it is so deeply wounded, or does revenge forever poison the well?